Hello and welcome to GeNa. In this tutorial I'll take you through painting with GeNa 2. So here I have a terrain that I created with Gaia using the random terrain generation feature, and what I'm going to do is go down to this nice little central area here, and the first thing we'll do is we'll set up some fences. So we'll right click GeNa, add spawner, and then with Gaia we've got these awesome samples from 3D Forge, and I'm going to grab the fence sample and drop it onto GeNa. GeNa has now added that as a prototype, so it's a P for prefab and conform to terrain, which means we want the fence to follow the height and slope of the terrain, and that's going to spawn at 100% height, 100% size. So that's all good. Now in our advanced settings we've got some things like light probes and spawn optimizers. We don't need to worry about that for now. And we've also got scale to nearest int, which means it'll be a whole size, like a 1, 2, 3, 4 in the scale, which is good because we want our fence to be scaled to its full size. And then we've got some spawn criteria. We're going to turn this off because I want it to spawn exactly where I'm clicking on the terrain. Actually, the other thing I'm going to turn off is force spawn. I only want this to spawn when it obeys all of its criteria. So collision checking, let's just change that to point-based collision checking. So it's checking for a collision exactly where we click, not necessarily within the entire bounds of the object, although we could just as easily make it bounds, it's fine. And let's look at our placement criteria. Now this needs to change. This is set up for more organic sorts of things like trees and rocks and so on. We're doing a fence. It's a very structured thing. So our spawn type will be last spawn, and the rotation will be last spawn closest. So basically, as we go across the terrain, we will spawn near the last spawn, and we will rotate to the closest point of that last spawn, and we want the scale to be 1, because we want our fence to be at its full size. So now we look at the actual spawn overview itself. We're not going to do a single spawn, we're going to do a painted spawn. You notice the flow rate is set to 2.75. The flow rate is the distance between each spawned object as we move along, or the distance between each attempt to spawn as we move along through the terrain. And it's picked that up automatically from the size of the object itself. Now, when GeNa spawns, there's a throw distance, and for organic things, you know, we want a tree, and then from that tree another tree, and that tree another tree, and then that one, and so on. We're doing a very structured thing, and we're in complete control, so we'll set that throw distance to 0, and then the spawn range, because this is actually very, very contained, we'll set that to 1. Okay, so let's have a look at what happens here. Now this is going to be wrong, but I'm showing it to you really to show where the confusion might come. So if I hit Control and drag along, you notice all the rotations are still incorrect. So the way GeNa does rotation is it's based on, it sort of goes from top to bottom. So this is where we're placing things, that's all good. And if we look at our placement criteria, this is how we're rotating, and we're actually controlling the rotation from the last spawn. But the thing is, GeNa typically is set up for organic things like trees, rocks, and so on. And inside of our prefab here, we've actually got, by default, an additional random Y rotation, so around the Y axis. Now for trees and rocks and things, that's good. For what we're doing, it's not. So we'll set that to 0. So basically, don't do any other rotation. This positional offset's based on the prefab itself. It's automatically calculated. Scales are all the same. So let's see what we can get now. Cool. So now we've got a nicely placed fence. Notice I'm going fairly slow here. That's because when you're painting, it needs a little bit of a higher definition. Now sometimes you get some odd rotations in there. Now it's always trying to get it's rotating to the nearest thing that it can find. And sometimes you go around corners, that's not 100%, but mostly it's pretty good. The other thing, if you start to get sort of this zigzag effect, that can be because you're actually trying to place things too closely. So let's decrease this, for example, and I should be able to demonstrate that. So what's actually happening here is that we're getting collisions because we turned off force spawning. So because it's getting collision, it's actually not spawning the object. So that's why you're getting this funny missing thing. So let's maybe make it to 3. And we'll just clear them all up. And let's go and place them over here along this ridge. It's got a nice ridge here. So I'm just going to paint our little fence down this ridge line. Now it's not always going to get it 100% right. There's often various reasons, but you can see it's gone pretty good, and compared to doing this manually, it's a lot better. I would probably even increase my flow rate slightly a little bit more. Let's see how we go again. There we go, that's looking pretty good now. Now we can maybe put another one along here. Now you notice the first one's always wrong. This is because the algorithm doesn't know where everything else is yet. So all the the ones on from there will be correct, but the first one's always wrong. So the easy fix to that is just delete the object. There you go, or manually change it yourself. Alright, so the next thing I want to move on to is trees and painting with trees. So let's go, where's our little rock outcrop? Here. So let's go over here. So I'll just put my little fence down here just for something interesting. Now it might look like it's not spawning, but this is actually just because we've got LODs on them. So let's go to trees. We'll add another GeNa spawner. And I've childed it to that, I don't want that. And we're going to add a tree. Now by default, if you've got trees set up in your terrain, which we have, we've got our standard old speed trees, GeNa will pick them out of the terrain. So that's add tree, add grass, that means pick it out of the terrain. And when you drag something onto here, that means it's got to be a prefab or something that's a speed tree, for example. So these will be spawned as prefabs, these will be spawned as terrain objects. So look at our criteria for our tree. It's just standard old tree. If you wanted to choose another tree in the terrain, you could, but we'll leave it with this. And let's look at our spawn criteria. So we're doing bounds-based collisions, and that's minus 0.2. So if you imagine the bounds of a tree, minus 0.2 means allow collisions to come in a bit, and this allows you to get some overlap between your trees. We're going to check our height. We're going to turn off check height, and we're going to turn off check slope because I want this thing to go exactly where I want them to go. And let's look at our placement criteria, organic, ranged. Yep, I'm okay with that. Now let's look at our spawn mode. Again, we'll change it to paint, and it's picking up this flow rate from the size of the tree. If we go into our detail here, GeNa will actually give you the dimensions of the object that you're spawning, and that's quite useful sometimes when you want to set up a precise slice on the spawn. So I'm going to drop that down to 5 meters. I'm going to turn off force spawn because I only want it to spawn when all of our spawn criteria are met, and we can turn off all this other stuff because we don't need it. Alright, so we've got a 5 meter paint dimension. We're going to turn off the throw distance in the spawn range. So now it's going to paint every 5 meters. So let's have a look at that. So here we've got some quite precise spawning of our trees. I'm not very good at drawing, which is why I'm a software developer. But there you go. Very nice painting of trees. Now let's do something a little bit more useful with this. So I'll just hit Control Backspace and delete them. I've actually pre-set up a couple of different tree spawners where I'm actually spawning a lot more detail. So first I'll go with my prefab version. So notice it's a P for prefab as compared to a T for terrain tree. So it's a prefab. We are not conforming to slope, but we could easily just make the trees conform at a 90-degree angle to the slope if we wanted to. And let's look at our spawn criteria. So this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint my trees on a texture, and it's going to basically, wherever I shift click, you can notice as I'm doing that the texture is updated because it's picking up the texture. And if you look at how the selection is growing here, as I change the texture range, this makes this more or less accurate. I'll give you a better example, maybe here. So if we increase the range, we start to allow other textures to come through, or if we decrease the range, so we want this texture to be fairly strong, then we're only selecting where that texture is. So notice that on the rock, on this, on that, they're all different textures, so they select for different areas. And this is a really key point to the way GeNa works. GeNa is powerful because when you sample your environment, it uses that to determine where things could possibly go. And then it uses these placement criteria and the overall settings to work out in that area where could we possibly place things, and the various algorithms that do that. So we've got we're still got our bounds collision, so we can have overlap trees, but we are selecting for textures. So let's have a look at this in practice. Oh, actually, I'll finish off telling you about the rest of the criteria. So just organic range, this is the default stuff. And then we've got paint mode, we're every 5 meters. We've got a throw distance. So even though as we drag over here, every 5 meters, GeNa will do another spawn, that spawn has a throw distance of 17 meters and a spawn range of 75 meters. So from that point where it spawns, we can have stuff spawned at a potential range of 75 meters around it. And then when we are using the organic system of spawning, or the organic algorithm, when we place a tree, it can be up to 17 meters, 17.1 in this case, from where we were spawning. So here, up to 17 meters could get us a tree here, for example. So we spawn that tree, and then from here, the next time we go to spawn, up to the instances that we're going to spawn here, between 10 and 30 instances of those trees, it'll then up to 17 meters spawn the next one. So now we've got a tree here and a tree here, and the next iteration through, this one will get a chance and this one will get a chance. And it's the way things grow in nature. They organic, as you know, as the parent grows to maturity, it chucks a seed and so on, and things grow out. So this algorithm works in that sort of a way, and it'll spawn between 10 and 30 instances. So let's have a look at that. So you can see what's happening here as we're spawning just on this texture. And I'll do it again here to demonstrate why it's a powerful thing. So I'm going to spawn here, but notice I'm dragging over here and nothing's getting spawned. That's because we're sampling on that first rock texture. As I move to this rock here, now we can spawn there. Move over those rocks. So this is a really cool way to select for just the types of environments you want to spawn on. So for example, if we look at our terrain here, we've got this sort of, you know, darker grass texture and a lighter grass texture. So I can start to go, okay, let's just spawn around these, but not on there so much, and so on and so on. Now I'm going to go to the next spawner. So this one, they were spawning prefabs, which have all been stored here like that. Now this one's spawning terrain trees. Actually, I'll just show you, how do we know it's a prefab? Because it's a P. How do we know it's a terrain tree? Because it's a T. So let's look at how this one's set up. Advanced settings, turned off for spawn, because we're obeying those spawn criteria. And let's look at our spawn criteria. So this time we're checking height. The minimum height is above 50 meters because we don't want to spawn down below sea level. So if we change that, you get our little sea level visualization there. You can turn that off if you don't want to see it. And then our maximum height is 1,000 meters. We can actually visualize our max height as well. So you can actually spawn right between a certain height range, between 50 and 108 meters. Let's just turn that off or get it out of the road. And then there's a height range. So these ranges are within the overall range. So if you click at, say, 30 meters, that will go from 25 meters above 30 meters and 25 meters below, so that the overall range is 50 meters. So, it's essentially plus or minus 25 meters from where you're spawning. And the slope is plus or minus 15 degrees, or an overall range of 30 degrees from where you're spawning. So we're checking slope, and we're checking our minimum height, and we're also got a height range. So the cool thing about this is when we spawn this, it's going to be very specific. From where you first sample, it's only going to find fairly similar terrain when it spawns. And I'll show you that in a second. Placement criteria, standard or default organic. And we're painting, the flow rate is 25 meters. So as we drag, every 25 meters we'll instigate another spawn. The throw distance for each individual tree is 27 meters, and the overall range for all of the tree instances is 94 meters. And there'll be between 14 and 30 tree instances spawned per spawn instance as we drag ourselves along. So let's go and have a look at this. We'll use this as an example of showing how this spawn criteria has been enforced here. So I'll go control click and drag some trees here. They don't go on the side of the mountain though, which is cool. That's exactly what we want. And we started here, but we went down to there and we noticed nothing spawned. That's because we're now outside of that height range. So this is a 2 kilometer terrain. Let me show you how quick and easy it is to populate your 2 kilometer terrain. I'm going to zoom out here and just start painting. Now you can do a lot more with this. I'm just showing you the concept very quickly. Now notice these trees are also obeying all of their collision and various other settings. So if you've got houses and other things down there, then automatically we should be avoiding those. And what you tend to do is, you cluster different types of things together. So you make patches of trees and so on, to get a sense of, to make things more interesting. Now I've also with this one, I've actually put a lot of distance between the trees. If we look at our spawn criteria, I've said I don't want trees to be colliding, so it's plus 0.17. So that means, that's why here you've got nice clustered trees, but these ones aren't very clustered at all. And that's because of the way I've set it. So if I drop that down to minus 21, you will now start to get really densely clustered trees. And that's a nice way to add a little bit of variation as well. All right, so what we've seen is various types of painting. We've done fences, we've done trees in various configurations. Now I'll just show you something really cool, which is not actually to do with GeNa. It's a new feature in Gaia, but shows you how to finish off your environment. So here we've got a stock standard Unity environment. We've now added lots of trees. I'm going to go into Gaia and hit create player, post effects, blah, 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 and watch what happens. All of a sudden, we've got a nicely set up scene. We've got fog, we've got post effects. Let's go and see what we can see in game. We're now in this forest we've just created. So let's just have a quick look. Just get Gaia out of the road. Notice the frame rate. We're getting quite a good frame rate, even though this is quite a big and dense scene. It's 2 kilometers. Here's our fence we created. Looking rather cool. We never did fix those little edge bits up, but again, quite a simple thing to do. So let's go and have a look down at the sort of height that you would get as somebody walking through the scene. And I'm going to zip along here because I want to show you the water we've added with the latest release of Gaia. So notice how the water is blending nicely with the horizon. And we'll go down here, put our cool trees, and let's go and have a look under the water. This is new water that comes with Gaia 1.9, and it's actually become one of our favourite features. One of the interesting things about this water is we do some smart things with reflection probes, and we've really increased the performance of it. If I go back into Gaia, I'll show you some of the lighting as well. Window, Procedure Worlds, Gaia. We can do this in real time, which is rather cool. Go into our GX. So our skies, these are samples of something that's coming soon. So we can go to morning and then say evening. So we can quickly change the feel of our environment. Notice we've included sounds now with Gaia, and we can also change our water. We can go from the current style to maybe clear blue, deep blue, toxic green, cyan. Let's go to deep blue. Let's go back down under the water. So as you go under the water, the fog also changes. And yeah, hopefully that's given you a good sense of painting and how we can quickly do an entire 2 kilometer island with a huge amount of control with the latest version of Gaia and GeNa. Thanks for watching.